Hey, my name is Chelsea Fagan, and I'm the founder and CEO of The Financial Diet, a totally independently owned and operated company of women who love to talk about money. Welcome to The Financial Confessions, a weekly show where we talk to people about their personal finances, their professional industry, and how money shapes their lives. You can listen to or watch new episodes of The Financial Confessions every week on YouTube or your preferred streaming platform. You can also support TFD and get exclusive access to our entire catalog of ad-free bonus videos, workshops, Discord community, our book club, and more by joining our members-only community on Patreon or YouTube. Our 2024 goal is to be primarily supported by our incredible community, and joining our membership program is the best way to do that. Enjoy the episode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to an all-new episode of The Financial Confessions. We are here today embarking on a 3-week journey of a special topic that has been by far one of our most requested, especially when it comes to talking to quote-unquote real people. And at this time of year, as of filming, it is the end of April. It is a topic that is very much on everyone's minds, especially if you are a woman between the ages of, let's say, 23 and 40. And I am talking, of course, about wedding culture and sort of more relevantly to The Financial Confessions, the wedding industrial complex. Real historians of the channel will know that a few years ago, I made a video that was very critical of a lot of aspects of the wedding industry, specifically talking about how so many of the things that we consider to be necessary purchases now are things that didn't even really exist a few decades ago, and how while the spending has definitely crept up enormously for the couple actually throwing the wedding, a lot of that cost is being unintentionally or intentionally passed on to the people who attend the wedding, and especially the people who make up the bridal party. As a result of that video, I did end up getting a little bit called out by a member of the wedding industry herself, a wedding planner, who is also a content creator. She made a whole video kind of critiquing my video and going point by point, and we ended up sitting down for an episode of The Financial Confessions to kind of talk it through and try to understand each other's positions a little bit more. Now, this was a few years ago, and in the time since, I have to say personally that I have gotten perhaps even more firm on the ideas that I expressed in my original video. While I definitely think that a wedding is a beautiful thing and a wonderful way to celebrate with friends and family and to express your love, I would be hypocritical. I myself had both a civil and a ceremonial wedding, even though the max we ever had in terms of capacity was 30 people, so it was smaller than average. I definitely participated in wedding culture in my own way. However, as the years have gone by, I do think that we have started to tolerate a higher and higher level of just pure financial insanity on all sides of this issue. And speaking as a woman who talks about personal finance and consumerism primarily from the angle in which it impacts women and is targeted at women, it is impossible to ignore how much of the financial pressure of the wedding industry is directly focused on women. We are selling a very specific narrative about what a wedding should look like, what you're required to do and provide for people, and perhaps most importantly, how it should appear on social media. It is impossible to ignore that, especially in the past decade, with the rise of social media and everything from your bridal shower to your bachelorette party to the wedding itself playing out for an audience well beyond the actual people who attend these events, the pressure has gotten more and more intense on every aspect of wedding culture. To talk about this issue, I have 3 guests. One who went into credit card debt attending weddings and being a bridesmaid. One who was a bride herself, who regrets how much she spent on the entire thing and wishes that she had eloped instead. And then a former celebrity divorce attorney who now writes almost exclusively about prenups and talks about how prenups are a much more important thing to focus on in the lead up to marriage than the wedding. So hopefully with that 360 view of the whole issue, we will be able to speak about this in an empathetic yet financially literate way. I know this is an emotional thing for many people, and some of us have maybe even made decisions that we regret or put financial burdens on other people that looking back now we wouldn't have done again. This is a safe space. We are here to talk about it, and no judgment needs to be involved. To start off our conversation, my first guest is the aforementioned former bridesmaid and wedding guest who put herself into 5 figures of credit card debt to attend all of these celebrations, and looking back, thinks it could have happened a lot differently, especially if our culture around how brides interact with their bridal parties was maybe a little bit more financially conscious. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome my first guest in the series, Abby Taylor.
Hi, Chelsea. Thank you so much.
Thank you for being here. So, first and foremost, let's just start with your story. How much credit card debt did you get into, and how did you get into it through weddings?
Of course. As I previously mentioned to you when we were planning this, I got into around $10,000 of credit card debt, both as a bridal party member, attending a bunch of weddings, and also attending a bunch of bachelorettes.
Like, how many events did this cover between all of the different celebrations, and what was kind of the time span that we're talking about?
So the time span was fall of 2021 to fall of 2022. And that covered 7 weddings and 3 bachelorette parties.
Wow. And where would you say the bulk of the credit card debt actually came from in there?
The bulk was flights and accommodations. For myself, not the majority, all of the weddings were in New England, except for one, which was international. I'm originally from New England, but I'm now based in Washington, D.C. And so for me, I had to keep getting back up north for all of the weddings, and then accommodations for those as well. However, I think the sticking point I have with the spending was more geared towards the bachelorettes as opposed to actually being there on the day to celebrate my friends. That was worth the cost to me.
Well, can you talk a little bit more about why? Because I know in the emails that we exchanged that you expressed that you feel like you could have saved probably like $3,000 or $4,000 of the money that you spent if the brides had been more proactive about speaking honestly with their bridal parties about budget. Is that mostly because of the bachelorette stuff?
That is definitely mostly because of the bachelorette stuff. Um, I would say that they were very upfront about being a member of the bridal party, and a lot of them covered um, hair or makeup or one or the other. They would cover parts of other things that we were expected as bridesmaids to cover, which I thought was very generous, and they gave us a lot of notice on that front. I kind of I did a breakdown to prepare myself for this, which I'm happy to dive into at any point if you'd like. But the bachelorettes were where any expectation that was set was just kind of blown out of proportion. And I don't know if I would necessarily blame any of the brides for that, but I think they could have mitigated that risk.
Well, let's start with the breakdown. Walk us through it.
Okay. My largest expense was flights and accommodation. And I went back through my credit card statements and I spent $5,870 on flights and accommodation for all of the weddings and bachelorettes. The largest chunk of that was for one friend's international wedding in Europe. So peak summer, a little bit harder to keep that cost down.
And and what was the other money on?
The other money I broke down based on friends' bachelorettes and being in the wedding party, as well as the kind of miscellaneous expenses. So that's broken down into clothes, shoes, makeup, last minute things like dress tape, um, congratulatory wedding cards, little bits and bobs.
Now, you say that it is on the bachelorette. Well, let's actually back it up before we get into the bachelorettes. So, $10,000 of credit card debt to me implies that that was money that you didn't really have at that time.
Yeah, I would agree.
And I believe you're paid off now fully. How long did it take you to pay it off? Congratulations.
It took me a little under 9 months to pay it off.
Okay, so like that's pretty fast, honestly, for as much debt as it was. But credit card debt is notoriously very high interest, so obviously you're very motivated to pay it off as quickly as possible. But so you didn't have that money, and you pretty much knew going in that you would have to finance this. Is that something you ever brought up with any of these brides, especially the ones that you were a bachelorette or a bridesmaid for?
I think that's a really great question. For me, I think Not I think. I had a false sense of confidence. I had just started a new job where I had increased my salary by about $40,000.
Wow.
So I felt like I was rolling in it. I also had never been in any type of debt before, let alone credit card debt. So that was the first time ever in my life that I hadn't been able to pay off my credit card bill in full. So for me, it was a bit of a snowball. I was like, okay, I can't pay off the entire bill, but if it's only $100, $200 left over, that's easy. I can cover that on the next bill. But by the time the next bill came around, I had had to book another flight, another hotel. Um, so it really snowballed and it crept up on me. And as you mentioned, the high interest rates. I've been following TFD for a really long time since college. And I think that's partially why I was so embarrassed. Like I'd always heard about other people getting into credit card debt, but I was always kind of like, not me. I've learned. And turns out that was naive. And I'm very frugal. My friends know me to be very responsible with my money. I did set certain boundaries for the bachelorettes. My friends know I'm not a really big drinker. All the brides and all of my friends who are also on those trips are very supportive of that. So on one particular bachelorette where I had a friend who her other guests were like really big partiers, in the midst of her having a great time, I'm out at the clubs, I'm sober, having a blast. She is in a corner being like, don't make Abby pay for drinks. So I had that boundary there and managed to save a bit on that. I don't necessarily think some of the guests listened to her saying not to make me pay for drinks. Actually, I know they didn't. That is one of the largest charges that I have in my little breakdown.
Oh no.
Yeah, which is where I think a bride having a larger hand. I think I deviated from your original question.
I mean, that's fascinating too, and we'll get into that. But so point being is that you not really being able to afford these things is not something that you brought up.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, listen, it's an eternal debate, right? Like anytime I will make like a video on this topic or talk about it, there's a really two-sided, I think there's a really valid point to both sides of the argument, which is yes, it should be on the people who are hosting these things to be really proactive about making their celebration as budget accessible as possible and also having that open dialogue with their group, and not doing that I think is a real oversight and not cool, honestly, especially given how expensive some of these things can be. However, that said, at some point we're all kind of responsible for speaking up for ourselves. And it's interesting to me, just as kind of like a sociological observation, that not really drinking much when you're on these trips and therefore not really wanting to be on the hook for that cost is something that you did feel comfortable bringing up and expressing. That's a boundary that you were like, I'm going to set that. I'm going to set the expectation ahead of time. And yet the fact that in the background of all of this, you really couldn't afford it and we're putting it on credit cards and going into credit card debt is not necessarily something that you would preemptively speak up about and set a boundary around, which I think really speaks to how taboo and shame-riddled it is in our culture to admit that these things are outside of our budgets, even if certain aspects of it might be. Like to even say like, I can do this, but I can't do that, is something, it's very shocking to me how much that can feel really emotionally difficult and can even feel like it will impact the relationship. So when people do say to me when I make this content like, oh, well, people should just speak up about their budgets, it really does speak volumes how difficult that is a conversation for people to have.
So for myself, not to sound cheesy, I am very blessed to have like very, very beautiful, wonderful friendships in my life. And all of these women, and then the one man whose wedding I attended, were horrified when they found out that I had gone into credit card debt about it. This is the first time I've spoken like publicly about it, but everyone in my circles, I've been very open about it. And ever since that happened and I paid everything off in 2023, I am very good at saying no now. I actually get very proud of myself when I have the chance to say no. But one of my brides in particular, I've known her since I was 5. She is one of the best people I know. Like when she asked me to be in her bridal party, I cried. Um, and for her, it wasn't even so much, there wasn't any verbal expectation from any of my brides that I need you to do this. I need you, I want you to do this. You need to spend this for me. I think to speak to what you pointed out, how it's taboo and it's kind of like there's a societal expectation that's in an underlying current of when particularly you are on a bachelorette, everything is to make the bride's life easier and fun, and money is, this is my interpretation, kind of a dirty topic that we don't want to bother the bride about. I don't think a lot of them were aware of it. And I know I wasn't the only one who got into sticky situation. I think my situation was just larger because of the scale and scope of all of the weddings I have. And the older generations always warned me about the wedding year. They said there's always going to be one year in your life where you're just inundated with weddings. And they were right. I do think slightly different with inflation. And also they all lived in like the same state. But I think it's that expectation of don't worry about it to the bride that we give, which, yeah, that's so lovely. I mean, if you've ever had the opportunity to be having, I don't know, maybe like a really lovely birthday and everyone's like, oh, don't worry about it. But doing that for an entire weekend or an extended weekend or whatever the season of that person being a bride is, that just taking care of it and not making them worry causes worry for everyone else. You essentially turn into an accountant who's scrambling to do numbers. And I didn't enjoy that, not just as the debt part, but I also didn't like that responsibility being placed on myself and others just as an expectation.
Do you think, I mean, so using an example, you said that although the bride said to respect, don't make Abby pay for drinks, but you said it was one of your biggest expenses. Do you know how much you spent on it?
I was charged $700.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
$700 for something you didn't consume?
And when I was prepping for this and trying to organize my thoughts, I didn't want to bring it up to the bride because I didn't want to make it her problem. And I was like, I'm not comfortable because this is a stranger. And now I'm like, it was a stranger. I'm never going to see her again. I should have brought it up. And if she was going to make a big deal about it, that says more about her than it does about me.
Wait, sorry. I just want to make sure I understand the dynamic here. Who was a stranger in this scenario?
Okay. So, yeah. So I had a bride.
Yes.
And on her bachelorette, there was a guest who put her card down. And the bride said, as a reminder, don't charge Abby. And the guest said, okay. And then I got a Venmo request for $700. And the only thing I had had that night was a Sprite.
Okay. I'm sorry. Listen, I've been on bachelorettes. I can definitely go out and party with the best of them. Who the hell is spending $700 per person on drinks? How many drinks can one person consume? That's crazy.
I don't know. I truly do not know. This was a larger bachelorette party. It was in an expensive city down south. I'm not going to give the location just in case my friend does listen to this. Just bougie tastes.
I mean, to be fair, but even still, I mean, even at these places where like you're spending 20, 22, whatever dollars a cocktail, that's still an absurd amount to be whatever. I guess like bottle service, if you're getting like the $400 like magnum of champagne or whatever, but that is crazy.
No, it was atrocious.
So, okay, now I'm just living for mess. So did you get this Venmo request while still on the bachelorette trip?
When we got back, it was about a week later. And I'm trying to recall because, again, it's 2022, so it's been a hot minute. And I do remember that I asked one of the other members of the bachelorette party if they had that woman's number. And they gave it to me. And I was like, hey, are you sure your math is correct? And she said, yes. And I said, okay, because
Sorry, I'm digging down into this because this is like, now I feel like this is turning into an episode of like normal gossip. But so okay, but was it like a mix of things where it was like you guys went to a restaurant and ate food and then some people got drinks and didn't? Because then I feel like that could maybe be more justifiably like I just evened it out.
it was a club.
Oh God.
Pretty much like anytime we went somewhere, someone was either asked or like volunteered to put their card down. I guess that woman put her card down that night.
So this is for one night.
For one, it was, I think there were about 12 women on the trip, 12 or 14 women.
Wait, hold on. Let me run my numbers. You guys spent like 10 grand at a club in one night?
Chelsea, I do not know.
What are you, Pitbull? Oh my God.
Apparently. I mean, but Mr. 305 can probably pay that. And I couldn't.
Yes, let's not slander Mr. 305's name.
No, I love Mr. 305, Dale, whatever.
Dale worldwide. That is so wild, Abby. Okay, first of all, you are a saint for not going after that woman because I would have lost my damn mind. That is crazy.
Can I sprinkle a little additional bit of intrigue? Because now I'm feeling slightly
Please. I'm living for this.
This was a woman who earlier on the trip had been bemoaning having to ever put her card down because previously she was on a bachelorette and she couldn't pay off her credit card bill because people charged so many drinks to the tab.
Okay. Well, sounds like we need to have a part 2 with this lady because I bet she has some yarns to spin when it comes to
my
credit
understanding,
cards.
she and the bride aren't close anymore. Yeah. I don't have any details on that, but I wish she hadn't been invited.
Ooh, scalding take. Okay. But all of this is to say, I mean, $700, I thought you were talking about $700 spread over like a weekend, which I still think is a lot for drinks. That is total absurdity, $700 per person just in drinks just for one night. I mean, that being said, not that I would ever do it, but you can definitely see when you go to these like really, really high-end nightclubs. I think actually one time, I'm going to put my cards on the table. It was a friend's birthday and we were at a karaoke bar. It was like maybe a dozen of us as well. And I was like, oh, like I'm going to get a bottle for the birthday girl and like all the mixers and they like bring it in with the sparklers or whatever. That was $400 for like a bottle of like Chopin vodka or something crazy, which still wasn't even that much. But if you're doing like bottle service type vibe, I suppose you could get there. But what's interesting to me is that, like, what was going through your mind when you not confronted, but like double checked and she was like, no, you owe this and you knew you didn't? Like, did you just sort of be like, well, I'm just going to take this L basically?
Yeah, because at that point, I don't think that was earlier in 2022. So at that point, the debt wasn't quite debting yet.
Okay.
So I was like, okay, fine. I love my friend. I don't want to burden her. I know there were already like some other stressful things going on as pertaining to the wedding. And again, it comes back to, we don't want to burden the bride, who is our friend that we love. So I just swallowed it.
Now, obviously that's a pretty unique situation for that one.
I hope that never happens to anyone else.
Yeah, I'm sure it does, though. I'm sure it does. And here's the thing. I want to share a hot take on this, which is that I do think we need to come up with a better system for group dinners in the sense of like like for me, when my husband and I, and obviously this is like a privileged place to operate from for sure, but I think more people could be doing this than do it, which is like if we have certain group activities, we will either just pay for everyone outright or we'll cover certain parts of it outright, because I think that or we'll do like prefix so that like everyone knows exactly what they're getting into. But I think that for a lot of group outings, obviously this is a very cut and dry case of like you were in the club and you were not drinking, so you should have realistically owed $10. Well, they charge like $30 for a Sprite in some of those clubs.
Even an expensive Sprite, but not that expensive.
Right. So like that's a very clear-cut case. However, there are a lot of these events, and not just for weddings, I think for all kinds of celebrations, where people will go out to a group event and there is such a level of stress and anxiety of like, well, I'm just getting this, and this. And then the other people are like, well, we're getting apps, we're getting desserts, we're getting a bottle of wine. And it's like, if you have like one piece of it, but you didn't order it, do you owe an equal amount? And I do think like on the part, and obviously I think there's often a dynamic, like you said, of like, if you're the bride, if you're the birthday girl, we don't want to bother you or burden you. But at the same time, if you're hosting it, I do think there is a real responsibility to make sure that either you are making it affordable for all the attendees, or you are at minimum determining what the price is going to be ahead of time, doing like a prefix style thing so that people can opt in or opt out in totally good conscience. And I feel like that doesn't happen enough.
I now have a bunch of kind of rules and boundaries for myself as a guest, but also now very strong opinions on what I would do. And of course, I feel like that's such an eye roll to women who are engaged and are planning their weddings when their single friend is like, well, here's what I'd do, but here is what I would do. Because I don't want to put any of my friends in that situation ever again. Obviously, I love planning things. I love planning trips. In my mind, a bachelorette is just a trip where people wear a little bit more white. Controlling and setting budget and expectations. Have a document. I'm currently planning a girls' trip with some of my former brides and some of my other friends. I have a big Google Doc going. I've got a Google Excel. Whenever there's an activity that we want to do, I give price options. And if everyone's in agreement, we pick whichever option works best for everyone's budgets. And I text everyone separately to confirm, can you afford this? If not, me as the leader, I'm going to say, no, we're doing this one. And that way no one knows who it is. Honestly, a little controversial since I know I was in credit card debt, but my card. I will put down my card. I will take pictures of receipts, because then the responsibility falls on me to reach out and find out, okay, who had what, who owes what. I don't want to like plug any particular app, but there are tons of apps these days where you can put in like input in on group outings or trips, who put their card down for what and what each person owes.
Shout out Splitwise.
Yeah, that's my favorite, but I didn't want to.
My husband likes TriCount, but I find it a little difficult to use. Continue.
No, I agree. I'm a Splitwise girly. And then just like being the go-between, I wouldn't want anyone to, not that I don't love surprises, but I don't want anyone in the group to be going to another member of the group and being like, oh, let's plan this for Abby. And then it's an added cost. Or I've had situations where they'd be like, oh, I bought this for the bride. Everyone now owes $15. Which like, I think is a little rude. I think you should ask if people want to participate. But those are my guidelines to hope for myself to hopefully make it easier on people. And I am applying them to normal group trips and not just bachelorettes, because I love traveling with my girls, but I also want no one to ever go into a situation like I was in.
Well, first of all, shout out to you, unsung hero. You're not the hero. What is it? You're not the hero Gotham deserves, you're the hero Gotham needs, or whatever. Clearly I haven't seen that movie in a long time. First of all, I think all of that is dead on. I would add another layer to it though, and I've thought this especially over the past, I'm in my 30s, I'm 35. However, being a godless urbanite heathen whose friends are primarily in large urban metropolises and like, you know, they're just on a different timetable. So I have a lot of friends still. I did have a lot of weddings in my late 20s, early 30s, but I also have a lot of friends who are engaged, soon to be engaged, like getting married more in their mid 30s. And I do feel like the vibes need to be very different depending on the age bracket you're in when you get married. Like, first of all, I have very complicated thoughts on registries, which is that first and foremost, if you're having like a destination wedding, for example, you should not also expect people to pay hundreds of dollars to give you a gift. I just don't think that that's appropriate. And also, again, when you think about the concept of a registry, this is really for people who are just starting out their lives, who are maybe moving in together for the first time, who are just buying their first place, who don't have a lot of things for their home, you know, as opposed to, you know, I'm in my mid 30s, I've owned a home for years, I have a fully stocked kitchen, fully stocked everything, and now I'm just sort of gilding the lily. And so I do think that there's not enough of a tonal shift with the ages, depending on, you know, where we are in our lives. But I also think, you know, it surprises me that when people do these kinds of events and trips, there's not more of a sort of narrative or at least kind of dialogue or energy around like, the reality is that money is very different for different people. And someone at the trip might be in a position financially where covering everyone for a dinner would mean nothing to them, really. Whereas another person might be in a position where every little thing is like super, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? Super stressful financially. And I don't necessarily see, even from these older, more established, you know, couples who could afford to be paying a lot more and covering a lot more of the costs, especially when it comes to things like a bridal party. For some reason, that just hasn't really entered our cultural narrative around these things.
I would agree.
You know, like if you're 35 and making, you know, a combined income in the hundreds of thousands and you expect your bridesmaids to have a dress, buy them the dress. Like, why are you outsourcing that cost onto people? It's strange to me that these traditions have not kept up with the financial realities of people getting married later and at a more established place in their lives, you know?
Personally, I don't ever want to be a bridesmaid again. I actually recently got into a little bit of heat. I was home in Massachusetts. One of my good friends was visiting, and she and I were sort of lamenting ugly bridesmaid dresses. And I said, yeah, I'm not doing that again. I'm just going to say no. I was at my childhood home, so my mom was there, and she goes, well, what if friend sitting next to me really wants you to be her bridesmaid? And I kind of rolled my eyes and I looked at my friend and I was like, okay, I guess. Like, I love you, but also stay out of this, mother. Because I personally don't think I'd ever have a bridal party. I do want to have a bachelorette, but mostly because, again, I love girls' trips. But I don't want anyone to have to, especially if I'm not in a financial situation where, like you mentioned, I can afford to buy everyone's dress, buy everyone's hair and makeup. I don't want to put that onus on them. Like, me loving you isn't going to change if you're not in a matching dress up next to me at the altar.
We are well into May, and for many of us, that means that our New Year's resolutions are nowhere to be found, RIP. But I want to say that I am personally very proud that one thing I committed to at the beginning of the year I've actually been good about, and that is using the internet in a better, safer way. This is why I'm thrilled once again to have our friends from Delete Me back as today's sponsor of TFC. I became a Delete Me member and started using their services last year, and I could not recommend them more to the TFD community. Have you ever wondered how much of your personal data is out there on the internet? It's sadly probably more than you think. Your name, contact info, social security number, and home address, even information about your family members, all being compiled by data brokers and sold to the highest bidders online. I'm sure most of you have at one point Googled some random person you met or came into contact with and couldn't believe how much information you were able to find on them. I know I'm not the only one. This is why I personally recommend and use Delete Me. Delete Me is a subscription service that removes your personal info from the largest people search databases on the web, and in the process helps prevent potential ID theft, doxing, and phishing scams. Delete Me finds and removes the personal information you don't want online and makes sure it stays off. Sign up and provide Delete Me with exactly what information you want deleted, and their experts take it from there. Delete Me sends you regular, personalized privacy reports showing what info they found, where they found it, and what they removed. Delete Me isn't just a one-time service. They're always working for you, constantly monitoring and removing the personal information you don't want on the internet. Take control of your data and keep your private life private by signing up for Delete Me, now at a special discount for our listeners. Today, get 20% off your Delete Me plan when you go to joindeleteme.com/TFC and use promo code TFC at checkout. The only way to get 20% off is to go to joindeleteme.com/TFC and enter code TFC at checkout. That's joindeleteme.com/TFC, code TFC. I want to take a quick pause and thank today's sponsor, ZocDoc. If there's one thing you should take the time to actually do well, it's find yourself a good doctor, whether it's for your mental health, a regular checkup, a dentist, or whatever. And finding the right doctor should not be an overwhelming task. It should be the opposite. ZocDoc is a free app and website where you can search and compare highly rated in-network doctors near you and instantly book appointments with them online. If for whatever reason you're not feeling your best, finding the right care shouldn't take up all your time and energy. That's where ZocDoc comes in to help. Using their free app that millions of users like myself rely on, you can find the right doctor that meets your needs and fits your busy schedule. I've personally been using ZocDoc for years, and it is literally how I find all of my doctors and how I can always be sure to hit the right balance between someone who fits my schedule and someone who meets my needs. Shout out to my dentist. I love you. And I used to be really, really afraid of the dentist, so that's a big thing for me. Here in New York City, some doctors are booked up for weeks, if not months in advance, and that's not particularly helpful when you have something that needs timely attention. With ZocDoc, you can book an appointment with a few taps in their app. Choose from thousands of patient-reviewed doctors and specialists, browse doctor profiles, upload and verify your insurance information, and get the care you need in one place. Go to ZocDoc.com/TFC and download the ZocDoc app for free. Then find and book a top-rated doctor today. That's ZocDoc.com/TFC. ZocDoc.com/TFC. I mean, listen, I didn't have a bridal party. I'm here. I survived. Lived to tell the tale. I think, your take on that to me is the general thing about all of this, which is that literally all of this is arbitrary. None of it is necessary. None of it is a must-have. It's all a nice to have. Outside of literally legally marrying each other, literally everything else is completely optional if the point is to get married. And I do think, again, especially with social media and making these things so visible and so normalized, every passing year, I feel like there's more and more things added to the list of these are the things that you're supposed to do when you get married. Again, half of these things didn't even exist when our parents got married.
I know. And I think that that's such an interesting point, particularly, I know I just mentioned my mom. I remember as a child watching Say Yes to the Dress.
Oh, yeah.
And my mom just scoffing, and she was like, my wedding dress was $500, and I was like, yeah, but things have changed. You still can get an amazing dress for $500, but with inflation and, to your point, social media expectations, there's just is it a litany? Am I using that word correctly?
Yes.
Of things that are now coming to be expected and also kind of frowned upon if you don't do, because it used to be a very small scope of this is what a wedding is and this is what you do. And now I feel like it's just a swamp.
Well, and also with the way these things get expanded, I have been a bridesmaid where it was 3 of us. So it was very intimate and very, minimal. But I was also at a bachelorette party trip weekend with 17 people. And I'm 17 people. To me, that's that's the whole wedding, girl. I really do think we've also.
It's almost half for you. You said you had 30, right?
Yeah. But also, you said, the girl that charged you $700 for something you didn't do, in part, that's because she's literally a stranger. Like you said, you have no idea who this person is. She has no social ties to you, no reason to treat you with more consideration. And that's also part of the problem. When you're in these big, expansive, what's the word, amorphous groups, no one knows each other. They don't have the same boundaries. They don't have the same norms. They don't have the same budgets. No one's like talking to each other proactively. Because like if it's a really intimate group of people that you know well, then I think people will feel a lot more comfortable and empowered to speak honestly about their budget. But once you're thrown into a group with like, you know, a dozen people that your friend was in a sorority with, you're like, I'm not going to just like message this interminable group thread and be like, hey guys, I don't know if I want to spend $300 on that, you know?
This just reminded me of a sentiment I had in college, which was a while ago and prior to any of the bachelorette fiascos. But I remember being really stressed about my future nuptials as like a 19-year-old because I was like, I have too many friends. I was like, and I love them all, and they're all from different walks of my life. So how can I have a bridal party? Because I can't have 20 people in a bridal party. And I was like, and what if they don't play well with others? And what if it turns out to be this disastrous trip? And now I'm like, I don't want that at all. I don't want anyone up there because I guess cost. And it's interesting how even as a 19-year-old, I was worried about a bridal party.
I mean, it's very like top 8 MySpace coded. Like I think it's like a very like sorority sort of like a lot of other cultures don't even have concepts like this. And I think it's just very odd to like, especially once we're in our like 30s and stuff. It's like, babe, do we really have to say like, you guys are my best friends and you guys get to wear the special outfits? Like it just feels very like when you're a kid in elementary school, it's like who's giving you a Valentine on Valentine's Day? Like it's has a game show quality to it almost. But I would ask you, being on the other side of this, you've said a lot about what you would do differently. And I think also we cannot not acknowledge the fact that you went through all of this, went into all this debt, and it's not like you were having a wedding. It's not like people were doing the same for you. And I think we often don't state enough how much this burden disproportionately falls onto people who are not having their own celebrations where it gets reciprocated. But you've shared about kind of what you would do differently as a bride. What do you wish that you had done differently, or would you do differently going forward as a guest?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I'm saying no a lot more. Frankly, this has sparked me saying no in other facets of my life as well, just because if things don't align for me, I'm not going to do it. But one of the things I was proud about in my year of wedding debt, I wore the same dress to 3 weddings, planning on keeping up that kind of energy because if I bought the dress and I like it and it works for the weddings, I'm going to do it. I actually have one wedding next year of a really close friend, and she is the absolute goat because she is having her wedding a block from my apartment.
Nice.
I'm not spending really any money to attend her wedding. But I do have a few weddings that I believe I'm going to be getting invited to, and in the next year or two, and depending upon where they are, I'm just going to say no, not because I don't love them, but I just don't want to eat that cost.
Yeah.
And I do have slight fears for some of the people that it will be taken as a slight. I'm sure I too would feel upset if someone that I wanted to be there didn't come, but I also I don't want anyone to have that cost. And I also, you had a very small, intimate wedding, but most of my wonderful friends who have gotten married, they've even said to me like, oh, I wish we got to spend more time together at the wedding. We got like maybe 5 to 10 minutes with the couple because that's the day they're the celebrity. Everyone wants time with them. So I don't necessarily think, not to limit myself, I don't think I'll be particularly missed.
I mean, listen, we've all been to weddings before where it's like, if I made the cut, who didn't make the cut? Because I barely know you guys. I know like 3 people here. And by the way, I actually will say, if it's not a cost burden, those are always my favorite weddings because it's just like you're attending a free, really fabulous party. There's no like expectation. There's no family. There's no like, you don't have to like spend a bunch of time like intermingling with like random branches of the family tree or like friends from high school that you haven't talked to in years. It's just you get to sort of be anonymous and have fun. But I've been to weddings like that where it's like, babe, you're spending an obscene amount of money on this and I'm attending, and like we worked together once years ago and like barely speak. Like, why am I worth the expense? So I totally agree with you. And I think ultimately I say all the time, like, I do regret a lot of things in life. Well, not a lot. I regret some things in life, a decent amount of things in life, but I do not in any way regret having a small intimate wedding. We got to live together, all together in a villa for a week. We got to spend all this money, like making it a really special experience, making it worth the travel because half of the people had to travel, making it kind of like, as much a vacation as a wedding. But also to your point, each person we got to have such quality time with and really connect with on a deeper level and strengthen those relationships and get to know each other better. And I think a lot of people, I think there's a real focus in a lot of American life, but also in our relationships on quantity over quality in all aspects. Having more people feeling, you said it yourself, they're the celebrity. You feel popular, you feel well loved and surrounded, but in reality, A, a lot of these people are not people you're particularly close to, or B, even the ones you are close to, you don't get to have that quality time with them. So not to say everyone should have an intimate wedding. I know, especially in a lot of cultures, that's not necessarily always possible, but I do think there are a lot of people who would, if push came to shove, enjoy a much more intimate wedding. They just feel pressured into not having one, or they feel a societal cost to not having one.
Particularly, I think with family, there's that pressure from family. And I also want to clarify, I feel like I've been talking really negatively about weddings and bachelorettes. I love weddings. I love any occasion to dress up and to dance, because I don't feel like there's enough dancing in like adult life. I feel like as an American, prom really set me up for thinking I'd be attending way more black tie events with dancing, and we have weddings and that's about it. I love going. I love. I'm someone who cries during ceremonies. I'm not ashamed of that. I think, to your point, from everyone I know, the pressure wasn't even necessarily societal to have larger weddings. It was family being like, so and so needs to be invited, whether or not their family had a hand in the cost of the wedding. And there's that, who are you comfortable letting down someone? And for me, as a guest, I suppose saying no, I am letting down the bride and groom, but I don't think they'll know. Well, sorry, that was heteronormative of me. I will be letting down the couple. But I don't think they will actually notice day of if I'm not there, with the exception of maybe if I didn't for some reason go to my brother's wedding. He would notice, my folks would notice. But everyone else, you're just like, you're a little NPC, you're a little character in the background. Maybe you get a photo. I don't know if I have a larger thing to elaborate on that.
I think that's fine. I think that's fair, rather. With the family thing, I've always had a hard time relating to it in the sense that, like, my parents are each one of six. I'm not as close with I'm really close with some, not as close with others. They are very spread out geographically. So it wasn't as intuitive that everyone would be dropping everything and flying across the world to go to this ceremony. So I do want to acknowledge, especially if you have an extremely tight-knit extended family, especially if they're all very geographically close, especially if they're all kind of like, if all of these relationships are equal. I don't know how you all are maintaining equal relationships with like 30 cousins as adults, but if you guys are, I love that for you, support it. But I also think part of not just growing up, but also taking control of your life from a financial perspective is learning how to separate out what is important to you versus important to other people and put a really firm boundary there. Because I know a lot of people, let's say their parents, even if, like you said, they weren't really paying for things, were like, well, you have to invite all of my siblings and all of their kids. And, immediately you've taken the guest list from 40 to 100 without even blinking. And I think for a lot of people, there is I think that it becomes very blurred. Like, is this something that is meaningful to me? Is this something that I'm comfortable with spending money on? Is this something that I'm comfortable with taking on? Or is it just something that's really heavily expected of me? I think separating those two is important. But I also think as adults, we have to be okay with saying, listen, I would love to spend time with these people. I would love to go see them, hang out one-on-one. We need to catch up. We need to do more FaceTimes. There are often people that you barely speak to in a given calendar year. But I can't justify expanding the guest list in that way because it would necessitate a chain reaction of inviting so many people that it would balloon out of, my ability to afford it. And that's just not something I'm comfortable doing. I feel like a huge amount of people are just not comfortable with that. And I think until we become comfortable with that kind of a conversation in all of our relationships, it's going to be really, really hard to get control of a big part of our finances because there will always be pressure. There will always be things to say that you have to say yes to.
Question for you, do you feel, because I think it might apply in general, I don't think people in general are good at having boundaries.
I don't think people in general are good at having boundaries. However, I think to my earlier point, there is a unique taboo about having financial boundaries because to your point, I think there's this very strange expectation that like, oh, well, if it's family or if it's friends or if it's the bride or if it's this big special thing, then money shouldn't matter. Money shouldn't enter the equation. Money shouldn't be a deterrent. And that I think is really insidious because by that logic, you could justify doing exactly what you did, which is going into $10,000 of credit card debt. And, I know people personally who are still in severe student debt and spent close to 6 figures on a wedding. I personally find that a little insane financially, but I also think that that is something that if we took a step back and removed the finances from it, because these people, their parents knew they're in a lot of student debt. And those parents were the first ones saying, invite this person and that person, and we'll have it in this venue and we'll do it this big. If you were to take a step back and look at the real implication there, what you're really saying to that person is my day-long celebration with the people that I want in the room is more important to me than a huge chunk of your financial future. And that, I think, the fact that we have normalized putting financial pressure on each other in the name of family or in the name of celebrations or in the name of any of this is really something that we need to unpack because I actually do think outside of just people's normal lack of boundaries, which I think is a real problem, I think that there's almost a character judgment of if you let money get in the way of this, you're kind of a bad person.
The reason I ask is I feel like so many folks aren't used to hearing no because I think we don't necessarily have good boundaries as a generation with our friends. And I think that participating in wedding culture really puts a spotlight on those boundaries because it might be the first time that you feel like your friend is telling you no. And it feels like the first time that it actually has a lot of weight behind it because it's your wedding.
I think people aren't used to hearing no. And I think that to your earlier point, people take things extremely personally. And the wedding culture in particular has really engendered an environment of everything being personal. We have, especially the wedding industry, like the entire industry is built on making women think that this is the most important day of their life, that it's the defining moment of their life, that it's a snapshot of, all of the most important people and, the way they look and the way they dress and the people who are surrounding them and all of that kind of stuff. And we put such an immense pressure on it that there's no way to not heighten the stakes of taking it personally. I think the same woman, you said it's just a girl's trip with more white, and I agree with that. But if you were to look at a woman throwing a girl's trip and someone saying, I can't make it out of my budget, whatever the case, versus a bachelorette trip, there would be such a radically different perception of what that means because you are ascribing so much more value to it when ultimately those budget concerns are the same regardless of what the nature of the celebration is.
Excellent point. Thinking of my own trips. I
Yeah.
had friends who said they couldn't go, and I was like, oh yeah, that's a bummer. But you're right, there isn't that personal aspect to it.
And I mean, going back to my favorite person, the person who charged you $700 for something, for drinks you didn't have, I actually think that even in that case, I think that part of what makes a person more empowered to put that financial burden on others, even just other people in the party, is that context of like super heightened importance, because that means that you're probably more likely to just go with the flow, that everyone is going to be spending way above and beyond, that everything, you can kind of write everything off as like, this is for the most important day of this woman's life, and you're not going to make a big deal out of it.
It's an interesting case study in unspoken peer pressure.
So as a last question, what is one thing you think the brides could have done differently that would have avoided you being in so much debt, that other brides could maybe take into account when they're planning their own trips?
I think the one thing that would stand out to me is I think brides could take a much stronger hand in all of the day-to-day spending on the bachelorette. I think they need to be more involved in it to mitigate any little kerfuffles that pop up. Because if you have the bride involved, it's kind of like CCing your boss.
I agree. I think that's all the more important when these don't know each other. Like, why are they all communicating? I've been in like group threads where I'm like, I don't even know who half these people are. They're not in my phones. I like, why? It's just, to your point, there's a real like enforced fun aspect of some of this where it's like, I'm basically on a work trip now with a bunch of women I've met once in my life.
Yeah, you're on your best behavior.
100%. Well, Abby, thank you for coming, sharing your stories, sharing the budget breakdowns. I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. Out of curiosity, do you have anything to promote?
I am a lackluster book reviewer on TikTok. I'm much better about it on Instagram, but I've been getting peer pressured into posting on TikTok before we lose it. So please follow me on there, Abby Tay 22. Mostly, as a side note, I've been having a hard time getting APB. So
Oh, where are you based?
I'm in DC.
You should just be able to buy it anywhere.
Well, I'm on the wait list at the library. But last time I went into my favorite bookstore, they didn't have it, and they said they did have it previously. So,
Oh, well, I guess it's popular in DC.
the link. Find the link.
Find the link. I'll happily send you a copy for you to review. And we're working this summer on getting libraries to buy more copies because people have been complaining to me about the wait time. So,
And I guess I'm part of that problem.
you are part of the problem. Well, thank you so much. Everyone go check out her book reviews. And if you're throwing a bachelorette party or attending one this summer, let's all start putting up some boundaries. No need to go into $10,000 of credit card debt to show your friends that you care.
Thank you so much, Chelsea.
Thank you for being here. And thank you all for joining. And we will see you back here next Monday on a brand new episode of the Financial Confessions. Bye, guys.
Thank you so much for joining us, and be sure to tune in next week for an all-new episode of The Financial Confessions. The Financial Confessions is created by The Financial Diet and hosted by me, Chelsea Fagan. It is produced by Alexa Brooks-Major and Holly Trantham. Recording and editing by Emily Fisher, and music and sound effects are from Epidemic Sound. Want more of our content? Head over to our YouTube page, The Financial Diet, to see our monthly deep dives, videos of this show, and our entire backlog of videos and podcasts. I'll talk to you next week.